If you've been watching videos on this channel, I've been teaching you how to retain privacy and how to avoid being spied on by big tech. You've heard me talk about protecting your IP address, your device fingerprint, location, and so on. What I'll talk about today is another wrinkle that requires me to bring your knowledge up a notch. For this video, I will focus on knowledge about Google. The average person accesses the internet over 3.64 devices, and chances are that you are frequently on three: your computer at home, your computer at work, and your mobile phone. You may try to protect yourself on your laptop computer and have that effort be for naught because the spy may be done on another device. Google particularly has so many tricks that I think it would be likely that Google's identifying you on a side device while you think your main device is protected. This particular problem is called cross-device tracking and requires that we view the privacy problem not as a single device, but including all the devices you own. And I'll explain the complexities of this particular threat and what it means to your online activities. This is something very important to be aware of, so stay right there. When you need better search results like those from Google, but you don't want the Google tracking, check out privacy search engine Startpage.com. It does not collect or share any of your personal data, so you can search anonymously. My company offers a VPN service, Bytes VPN, Google phones, VPN routers, and now we offer a BraxMail email service. These products are made to protect you from big tech and their attempts to profile and track us. If you're interested in them, they are on my app, BraxMe. The link is in the description. Friends, unfortunately, protecting our privacy is very hard. The opposition, companies like Google, are intent on invading our privacy at every opportunity. We could get frustrated and give up, but I think we should consider this as a game. And if Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon play tricks on us, we are entitled to play tricks on them. So the trick that is being placed on us is cross-device tracking. In other words, big tech tracks us over all our devices simultaneously and also historically. Here's a tragic example. Putting a VPN on a laptop while leaving a mobile phone connected to Google and providing an IP address pretty much cancels the VPN. Google can obtain the IP address from the secondary device. Hiding your name on one device while another device is revealing it is another possible mistake. For example, switching Gmail accounts doesn't help if Google knows both accounts are yours. This video was triggered by such a trick that I discovered that Google did to me. And without my knowledge, it was actually tracking a de-Googled phone. The specific event for me was that I was setting up a new Linux computer. And one of the things I was doing was installing the email accounts on Thunderbird, which is my email client. As I worked on my Gmail accounts, I got to the step where each email account now requires two-factor authentication. I talked about this in another video. As a YouTube creator, I'm now required to have a Google phone, and that phone has to be configured for two-factor authentication with a Google app. Anyway, no problem with this first Gmail since I have a dedicated Googled phone for this. So I got to the step of creating another Gmail account that I had. This account does not have two-factor authentication enabled. And usually I just use text verification for this. Now, here's the surprise. Although I gave the Google account a text phone number to send me the two-factor authentication code, it refused to let me log in until I ran the Google app from my phone, which it designated as a Pixel. First of all, my only Pixel is a de-Google phone, and it has no Google apps on it. And it cannot have Google apps. There's no Play Store, so there was no way to satisfy this request. Yet the Google authentication wouldn't let me log in via text verification. As it turns out, when Google detects that a mobile phone has been used, it will force you to use a mobile phone app to validate your identity rather than a text. Anyway, I was suspicious. So I logged into Google accounts and was surprised to discover that this email was logged into several devices, some no longer in use, but specifically it showed the pixel. It may have been over a year since I logged into Gmail on this phone, and I never used it again. And this was the shocker. On the Google Accounts devices list, it showed the pixel with the current IP address, current location, and a current timestamp for the last sync, which was only a few minutes ago in my case. But I had no Google app running on the Pixel, and even the browser was DuckDuckGo, no Chrome on it. The phone had no Google login even. Remember, it's a de-Googled phone. I suspect there was a JavaScript background process called a web worker that was running on the mobile browser, and this could have been sending telemetry to Google. In any case, as far as my problem was concerned, by eliminating all phones from my signed-in device list, this is on Google Accounts, it finally let me log in using the text verification. But this was a puzzle that needed to be solved. It was time for some detective work. And why was this phone being tracked, and how? And this detective work reveals some of the problems we have with ensuring that all our devices are not leaking out information about our moves. Likely the average person will have devices leaking information, and I'm not average, and I was caught flat-footed, and only with an account I wasn't even using anymore. This two-factor authentication thing was never about security. It was just a way to connect our devices together to establish a cross-device identity. First, let's talk in general about cross-device tracking and how it is done. Then we'll get into various techniques used, including what Google was doing with my particular phone. There are two ways for doing cross-device tracking. One way is referred to as deterministic, and the second way is called probabilistic. Deterministic means they ask you to identify yourself with a login. So at every opportunity, Google and Facebook ask you to log in on every device. And of course, the login guarantees an accurate identity, even on different devices. Probabilistic means they track your behavior, and from the behavior they find a match that indicates an identity and stores that as a fingerprint so they know that it's likely to be the same person. Because probabilistic is based on fingerprinting data, it is not 100% accurate. Typically, an IP address is used for fingerprinting. But if you use a VPN, one of the ways they track is with the IP address. And there will be a mismatch for those on a VPN, since many people on the platform may have the same IP address. Another way of fingerprinting is with location data, especially data that can be accurate to 6 feet can pretty much identify individuals if location tracking is enabled. But some people will have location turned off, in which case their probabilistic data will be wrong. Now, this is a simple way that this is explained. However, it is clear that Google and their ilk are tricksters, and they will connive to get information in whatever way possible, even if it borders on being immoral. The complexity of evading tracking is multiplied when a bad player combines deterministic with probabilistic approaches, therefore increasing the accuracy of the probabilistic or the guesswork approach. Let me give you an example. I went to my de-Googled phone and logged into Gmail on the browser. As I already expected, the phone will now be part of the Google deterministic approach since a login identifies it clearly. But apparently the login will never expire. So even though I'm not using Gmail, the de-Googled phone will continue to communicate with Google all throughout time. I didn't check, but as I said earlier, there could have been a background JavaScript process called a web worker that could have been running indefinitely on the browser. I went to Google Accounts on my laptop and logged off the de-Googled phone. When I went back to the phone and looked at Gmail, it still persistently stored the Google ID and displayed it back to me, asking me if I wanted to log back in. This indicated a couple of things. First, it means that this trick keeps the identity on the phone even when logged out. So even if the phone is logged off Google, there is now a breadcrumb piece of data to be used for the probabilistic approach. Let's say I now went to YouTube on the phone without logging in. Then Google could, in theory, read the last Google ID and assume it is that person. If you use Gmail on a phone, even a Google phone or an iOS device, then Google is constantly getting pinged about the identity of the phone, the IP address, and even a location. If you use any third-party website that allows you to use a Google, Facebook, or Apple authentication, you are enabling something called OAuth. This means that the third-party app has to communicate regularly with Google, Facebook, or Apple anytime some authentication needs to be done. This can then be used by Google, Facebook, or Apple to pass identifiers about the phone, again, like the user agent, the IP address, and location. If the phone is a Google phone, then there are more identifiers. The advertising ID, the device serial number, IMEI, IMSI, MAC addresses, and so on will reveal a specific device. Once some Google app gets the information about the phone and passes it to Google, then it may be able to surmise an identity from other factors, even if the Google app is no longer working or the identity is no longer logged in on that phone. For example, if you reset the phone and assume it has a new owner, Google could verify if it's actually a new owner. It could check the location, the IP address, and the IMEI and know it's the same mobile device. Meaning, is there a way to escape Google's tentacles? This is the problem I'm discovering. Once a phone is tainted with your Google data, is it possible to erase those identifiers short of a factory reset? Would a factory reset even work? In the case of the Gmail login on the Google phone, I'm happy to report that resetting the cookies on DuckDuckGo did in fact stop the device from syncing with Google. Google phones cannot pass the IMEI to Google, so there's a limit to the spying they can do on this kind of phone. However, I see that in the Google account's history of signed off devices, the history always shows that device and its IP address and the last location, and there's no way offered to delete this from Google accounts. Of course, I'm smart enough to never leave location on a phone, though this can be determined using a reverse IP lookup database that I discuss in my location videos. In summary though, it's plain to see that every occurrence of an IP address with an identity is forever stored by Google. You can hopefully see the concern here. Let's say you do a factory reset on a Google phone and then create a new Gmail account with a different name. It should be apparent that Google would have a history of the IP address to match your Gmail, plus the device fingerprint like IMEI and so on. So they would know that this person established a new name versus someone who sold the phone. Then with multiple devices, they could draw that connection every time you used any of your Google accounts on your laptop. Now this is very concerning since this kind of trickery will pretty much eliminate our chance for some serious privacy. While we come up with techniques to hide our identity, Google could cancel everything out if we let them. In addition to these Google tricks, there could be other advanced methods of cross-device tracking, and this does not necessarily just include your device, but devices near you. For example, the technology is here for one device to issue a Bluetooth BLE ping, and then for nearby devices within 200 feet to capture the ping and return it to HQ. This could easily pinpoint an exact location if one of these nearby devices has location enabled. This is the same technique used with ultrasound. One phone can send out an ultrasound ping, and then other devices nearby can hear the ping and derive both the contact tracing information and location. Once Google determines which devices belong to you, it can check the location of all devices and uses it to determine your actual location, thus canceling out the privacy protection on devices that have location turned off or are running a VPN. Now, I'm using Google as the primary example here because Google is tied to so many platforms that many people use every day, from Gmail to Google Docs to Google Search to Waze to YouTube. However, these same tricks are likely being done by other big tech platforms. So how do we mitigate this kind of threat? I have 11 tips to use to prevent Google from effectively doing cross-device tracking. Number 1. Do not ever use third-party logins using Google wherever you want privacy. This, I mentioned, what's called OAuth. For any platform, always create a separate login. Number 2, use a de-Google phone. On a de-Google phone, there is never a Google login to the device. And the IMEI is not available because there's no Google app with admin privileges on it. So this is a major identifier that they are deprived of. In other words, they cannot get a proper hardware device fingerprint. They can also not run secret apps that do contact tracing using Bluetooth BLE. The Google phones only run open source apps. Number 3, if you have a designated de-Google phone, always make sure to never log into Google on that phone, even on a browser or on email. This includes all Google properties like YouTube. If you want to receive email on the phone, forward the Gmail to another email account. For example, like my BraxMail service. That way Gmail does not directly talk to the device. Number 4, either never log in to your home Wi-Fi on a phone or ensure that you're always on a VPN when on home Wi-Fi. The point here is to make sure your device IP addresses never match, or if they do, they match with a VPN IP address or a shared one. Since it is difficult to set up a VPN on multiple devices, the easiest way to do this is to install a BraxRouter, which is a VPN router. All your internet traffic will go to the VPN regardless of the device. Number 5, go to the Google account settings for all your Gmail accounts and make sure you have signed off all devices, particularly phones. Google forces 2FA with a phone if it detects a phone-based login. Number 6, regularly go to each mobile device available to you and clear cookies from it just to ensure there are no web worker processes left by Google on the browser. And check all the browsers if you have multiple. Number 7, always disable location on all devices. Remember that if Google finds an exact location at one device, it can then store that and assume it for the match cross devices in the future based on other identifiers it has gathered in the past, like IP address. By the way, unless you have a de-Googled phone, Google can always determine the phone's exact location via Wi-Fi scanning. So you can see the danger in a Google phone. Number 8, on the Google sign-in page, Google allows you to pick from the Google IDs already on the list. This list of previously logged in accounts is basically a way to connect accounts together and could be picked up by a tracker. So make sure to remove all accounts first before attempting to log in with another Gmail account. Hopefully this is being done only on a computer. You must not contaminate a de-Googled phone with a Gmail account. Otherwise, this can give metadata about the connection between multiple accounts. Number 9, on your devices that access Google, hopefully limited to PCs, you need to implement browser isolation. This technique isolates Google into Chrome only, while you do all other internet activity on other browsers. This prevents Google from seeing what you're doing on the other browser. Number 10, although there's no way to eliminate the history that is kept at Google about IP addresses, device fingerprints, just like any other IT department, we can assume that old data that never recurs is considered stale. So let's hope that if you follow good privacy procedures going forward, that the old data will not be used for active tracking. This is not guaranteed, but it is a prudent expectation, at least over a longer period of time. Number 11, go to Google activity controls on each of your Gmail accounts and make sure that all tracking is paused. Not that you can trust this, but this could be considered legally binding for Google to enforce, so we need to hold their feet to the fire on this. It should be clear from this list that if you do not have a de-Googled phone and do not have a VPN, then you are basically Zuck, since the tracking is unstoppable. I discussed this in other videos, but basically you cannot turn off location tracking on Google phones for Google or on iOS devices for Apple. So if you're not up to date on what a de-Googled phone is, I think you need to watch some of those videos so you get an idea. It is not foolproof. Having a VPN router, a de-Googled phone, and a Linux PC are essential elements for privacy, but they're just tools. As I discussed here, you still have to play the game, understand what the opposition is trying to do, and get around their tricks. I wish you success. I'm on the platform Odyssey.com. I'm now one of the top creators on there. Just for insurance, in case I get deplatformed, please follow me there using the link in the description. Your engagement with this channel in the form of comments, likes, and especially subscriptions is very important to me. This channel grows because of you. So I hope you hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.